Is the Cuban government the Trump administration's next target, Mr. Secretary?
The Cuban government is a huge problem. Yeah, the Cuban government is a huge problem.
Well, it looks like Cuba is entering the game, and Donald Trump is now threatening the entire Western Hemisphere with war if they don't cooperate with Washington. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermudez said that his country's army is ready to fight for Venezuela, and he compared the attacks on the country and the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro to fascism. In response, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that officials in the Cuban government offices have things to worry about. At the same time, analysts are expressing concern that Trump has taken a slippery path and remind him of his admiration for the dictator Putin, who seized part of Ukraine. According to analysts, Trump has rejected the most obvious hard-earned lesson from decades of failed United States foreign policy. Regime change wars are easy to start and hard to win, not to mention turning them into anything resembling real success. Nevertheless, Trump is now making veiled threats against the president of Mexico, and in Brazil they've said this is already going too far. But the president of Colombia said that Trump started the war to distract everyone from the Epstein files. Meanwhile, in Venezuela itself, people are celebrating the overthrow of Nicolás Maduro.
Subtitles by Dima Torzak.
Many years waiting for this long-awaited freedom. Well, it's still not perfect, but at least we're getting rid of one of the worst rats in Venezuela.
To President Trump's government for this freedom they are giving us. In some way, along with Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado, they become the liberators of Venezuela.
My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and write any comment under this episode. This really helps a lot in promoting the content on YouTube, and I would be grateful to you for that. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, today the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermudez, stated that his country's army is ready to fight for Venezuela. He compared the attacks on the country and the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro to fascism. Then he is quoted as saying, "Down with imperialism, which is genocidal, immoral, and fascist." This act of state terrorism that just happened in Venezuela is a blatant violation of international law. Military aggression against a peaceful country that in no way threatens the United States, and the kidnapping of a legitimate president sovereignly elected by his people. But to understand the sentiments of the president of Cuba, let me give you another quote from him. In his words, "One cannot remain silent and accept an act of state terrorism, which can only be compared to crimes against humanity committed by Israeli Zionism. In the Gaza Strip, everything is clear." As a result, the president of Cuba called for an uprising and stated that he does not recognize the dominance of the United States. Quote, "We do not accept and do not recognize the Monroe Doctrine. We do not recognize either kings or outdated emperors. For Venezuela, and of course also for Cuba, we are ready to give our blood and even our lives. This is not a time for half measures, but for decisive action and choosing a side against fascism and imperial barbarism." Here, it is important to note that, according to open sources, the number of Cuban troops who are about to fight for Venezuela was about 49,000 as of 2021, no more. But the president of Cuba is worried for a reason. Trump has already stated that the United States will govern Venezuela until a safe, proper, and balanced transition of power can be ensured. And after that, Trump openly stated that the next item on his administration's agenda will be Cuba. The American leader emphasized that the situations in both countries have a lot in common, and helping the Cuban people is a logical step after the events in Caracas. And this is where things start to get really interesting, which, by the way, Donald Trump himself no longer hides. During Trump's speech on Saturday, threatening remarks were mixed with specific threats against 3 other countries that may soon come under the Trump administration's scrutiny. These are Colombia, Cuba, and Mexico. other Western Hemisphere countries are waiting anxiously. The president of Cuba said, "All countries in the region must remain vigilant as the threat hangs over everyone." Marco Rubio replied, "The Cuban government has big problems. Listen, if I lived in Havana and worked in the government, all of this would worry me." Meanwhile, the Trump administration's warning is growing bolder and more decisive. Trump again accused the president of Colombia of producing cocaine and reaffirmed his previous threats, saying, quote, "He needs to be on guard and watch his back." In response, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, against the backdrop of events in Venezuela, called Trump, quote, "part of the pedophile clan that wants to destroy democracy in the world," end quote, from the president of Colombia. So that Epstein's list is not made public, they send warships to kill fishermen and threaten our neighbor with invasion because of its oil. And right after that, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, announced the mobilization of troops along the country's border with Venezuela to stop a possible flow of refugees from Venezuela. By the way, that's officially. During Maduro's rule, about 8 million people have left Venezuela, and unofficially, even more. At the same time, Trump warned that, quote, "something needs to be done about Mexico." He stated that he asked President Claudia Sheinbaum if she wanted help from the American military to eradicate drug cartels. He said directly that he respects President Sheinbaum, of course, but she cannot restore order in the country by herself, so Americans might come there. Let's move on. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who in recent months has tried to improve relations with Trump, stated that the overthrow of Maduro has crossed an unacceptable line and reminds him of the worst moments of interference in the politics of Latin America and the Caribbean. But Trump, by the way, doesn't hide this because he recalled the Monroe Doctrine, which states that the United States dominates the Western Hemisphere. And Trump directly stated that no one will ever again question America's dominance in this region. Interestingly, against the backdrop of Trump's statement that he might send troops to Venezuela, some countries have tried to act as peacemakers. And now the Colombian embassy in Washington stated in its message that President Petro offered the Americans help in resolving the crisis. And it's important to note here that the upcoming midterm elections in Congress this November play a significant role in this adventure. Because of the specifics, the implementation of regime change in Venezuela has opened another foreign policy front, by which the United States president and accordingly his Republican Party in Congress will be evaluated. And it seems that this is the topic that Trump will be pushed to the maximum in the elections. For example, Katie Miller, the wife of Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, posted an image on social media X on Saturday showing a map of Greenland painted with the American flag with the caption, "Soon." But how far can Donald Trump go? Well, realistically, it seems he can go pretty far. In his speech on Saturday, Donald Trump referred to the very Monroe Doctrine, developed 200 years ago, a foreign policy concept that has experienced something of a revival in conservative circles. It originates from the 1823 declaration by United States President James Monroe about the sphere of influence of the United States in the Americas, which also served as a warning to potential European colonizers to limit their ambitions. Well, in simple terms, with the Monroe Doctrine, the United States told the Europeans that they'd better not meddle in the Western Hemisphere because that's the zone of hegemony of the United States of America. And Trump was the first to say what was considered an internet meme. And then comes the quote, "The Monroe Doctrine is a very important thing, but we've greatly surpassed it. Now they call it the Donroe Doctrine," well, hinting at the name Donald Donroe. The main hope of some Republicans is that the events in Venezuela will also drag down the regime in Cuba. And here I'll quote Congressman Carlos Jimenez. "This could be a turning point. Venezuela supported the Cuban regime, and if there is democracy in Venezuela, that will stop, so we hope that maybe the regime will collapse under its own weight." But it's also worth noting that the president of Cuba isn't just boasting when he says that they're ready to fight, shed blood, and give their lives for Venezuela, and so on. He understands perfectly well, he knows very well that his soldiers won't have to fight anytime soon, and that's why he so boldly shouts about war. Obviously, it's to organize the transfer of power in Venezuela to a new government and to extract the country's oil resources. The United States will still need military capabilities to put pressure on the new leaders in order to ensure their compliance. Until Trump's plans in Venezuela are completed, Washington will refrain from launching further attacks elsewhere. After all, now the administration needs to work on preventing a split in the Venezuelan army or the strengthening of criminal groups that could further destabilize the country. In short, the Americans will be busy with this. And here I will quote Stephen Wertheim, a senior fellow at the American Program for Public Administration. Literally, whatever happens next in Venezuela, the consequences will not be limited to that country alone. Trump clearly intended with his attack to assert the United States' claim of ownership over the entire region. The United States is turning the already exhausted war on terror into a war against so-called narco-terrorism. The hostility that was once directed at terrorists in the Middle East is turning into a kaleidoscope of threats crossing borders in the Western Hemisphere. Today, the target was Caracas, but what about tomorrow? Trump has already made a plan of action. He took office promising to annex Greenland and take back the Panama Canal. Now that he has removed Nicolas Maduro, he can use the same argument to attack any number of countries. Yesterday, Trump stated that cartels control Mexico, and that statement contains all the justification Trump needs to invade that country. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned the Cuban government to be on alert. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like friends. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details provided. In the description of this video it says support Alexei Pichi's channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you provide. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.